Welcome to the world behind midnight. Some territories aren't marked on maps, they're marked in blood. We weren't deployed to Texas to eliminate a cartel. We were deployed to make sure nobody found out what eliminated them. That was the real objective, though no one used those words during the briefing. They called it a containment sweep. They called it a recovery operation. But when a SEAL team gets redirected from overseas deployment to a restricted mountain corridor inside US borders, you understand quickly that something has slipped outside the government's control. My name is Chief Mason Reyes. I served 21 years in naval special warfare. I've operated in deserts, where the horizon burns, and jungles, where the air feels alive. Nothing I experienced overseas compares to what happened in the Chizos corridor. Combat fear is sharp and focused. What waited in those mountains was patient. It didn't rush. It didn't panic. It behaved like it had all the time in the world. Lieutenant Nolan Pierce led our element. Controlled, disciplined, emotionally unreadable. Daniel Cade was our sniper. Mathematical in temperament, the type who trusted ballistic data more than instinct. Rowan Hale, our corpsman, noticed small things the rest of us ignored. I handled breach and close quarters movement. We had trained together long enough to operate without speaking. That cohesion is the only reason any of us left those mountains breathing. The briefing room had been swept twice for electronics before we entered. No devices, no watches. A satellite image was projected onto the wall, showing a canyon basin inside a restricted wilderness sector. 30 suspected cartel operatives had established a hidden camp. 48 hours later, aerial surveillance showed the site destroyed. No outgoing radio traffic. No survivors detected. Our orders were to insert, assess, eliminate any remaining hostile presence, and secure sensitive material. We inserted at 0200 via high-altitude jump to avoid civilian detection. The thermal drafts over the mountains made the descent unstable, but we regrouped without incident. The first thing that struck me after landing wasn't the darkness. It was the absence of sound. No insects, no distant animal calls. Even wind through the rock formations felt muted, like the terrain was absorbing noise instead of carrying it. Cade was the first to kneel and study the ground near our landing point. He didn't speak immediately, which meant something had his attention. I crouched beside him and followed his line of sight. In the dust was a footprint that resembled a human shape, but the proportions were wrong. Nearly 18 inches long, the heel impression was deep enough to suggest extreme mass. The forefoot showed pressure distribution consistent with digitigrade structure. Pierce ordered us forward without commentary. Mission focus remained intact, but a quiet tension settled into the team. We moved through the canyon in wedge formation, night vision cutting green silhouettes into the rock walls. The deeper we advanced, the stronger a metallic scent became. Not fresh blood. Something older. Copper mixed with damp animal musk. It clung to the back of the throat. We reached the cartel encampment just before first light. Vehicles were overturned, but not burned. Steel door panels were bent inward, as if compressed by force, exceeding mechanical leverage. Tents were shredded, though not sliced cleanly. Torn, twisted, equipment lay scattered, untouched. Ammunition crates remained full. There were no signs of firefight patterns, no spent casings indicating resistance. The bodies were positioned near the rear canyon wall, in a widening spiral, not randomly discarded, arranged. Limbs displaced with deliberate symmetry. No signs of feeding behavior. No tissue removal consistent with predation. Hale whispered that this wasn't a kill site. It was a message. The spiral narrowed toward a rock face that bore shallow gouges, as though something with claws had dragged patterns into limestone. Cade scanned the ridgeline through thermal optics. For a brief second, he exhaled sharply. I followed his scope alignment. A heat distortion flickered along the upper cliff, then vanished. Not enough for positive identification. Too controlled to dismiss. Pierce signaled withdrawal toward extraction coordinates 5 kilometers south. That was when the first rock fell. It didn't tumble naturally. It launched. A boulder impacted 30 meters ahead, with enough force to fracture along impact lines. Dust filled the air, obscuring vision. Through that haze, movement appeared on elevated ledges. Tall silhouettes transitioning between vertical surfaces with impossible balance. They weren't running on all fours. They were upright, but their legs bent backward at the ankle, like oversized canines adapted for power. The first clear visual lasted less than 3 seconds. Approximately 8 feet tall, dense fur blending with mineral tones of the canyon. Forearms longer than human proportion. Head structure elongated, but not fully lupin. Eyes forward-facing, reflective under low light. It studied us before retreating behind rock cover. That detail mattered most. It didn't charge. It evaluated. Cade fired a controlled shot when one reappeared along the ridge. The round struck center mass. The figure recoiled, but did not collapse. Instead, it shifted laterally with explosive acceleration and vanished from sight. A layered clicking sound echoed across the canyon, rhythmic and patterned. Not random noise. Communication, multiple sources responding from different elevations. They began hurting us. One silhouette forced our right flank with thrown debris, precise arcs calculated to disrupt formation. Another moved parallel on the left beyond visual confirmation. A third maintained partial visibility ahead, absorbing our attention. It was tactical pressure, not animal aggression. Pierce ordered fallback toward a limestone recess offering temporary cover. Inside the recess, the air temperature dropped abruptly. The musk odor intensified. My light traced across the walls and froze. Carvings covered the stone. Some weathered and ancient, others sharp and recent. They depicted tall, furred figures standing over smaller human forms. Not hunting scenes. Dominant scenes. The same spiral motif repeated again and again. Hale's voice trembled for the first time since insertion. He said quietly that the carvings suggested generational continuity. This wasn't a wandering predator. It was territorial lineage. Outside the recess, breathing patterns grew louder, slow, controlled. They weren't attempting immediate breach. They were waiting, testing our response cycles, measuring ammunition expenditure. Pierce attempted satellite contact for air support. Response time, 20 minutes minimum. In a controlled firefight, that's manageable. In a canyon where elevation favors coordinated predators, 20 minutes is an eternity. Another rock struck near the entrance, followed by a low guttural vocalization that vibrated through limestone. One arm reached briefly into the recess, testing distance. The limb was thick with coarse fur, ending in curved black claws, adapted more for gripping than slashing. I fired twice into the forearm. A deep resonant sound followed, not purely animal pain, but something layered with anger. The arm withdrew immediately. A skull rolled into the recess entrance, clean, polished by natural elements, not fresh, deliberately presented. Psychological warfare. Pierce made the decision we all knew was coming. We could not hold position. We would create disorientation with flash and smoke, then push hard toward extraction, regardless of casualty risk. The breakout was violent and chaotic. Flashbang concussions echoed through the canyon as we moved through smoke cover. Shapes advanced through haze with terrifying speed, navigating terrain they knew intimately. I saw one leap from a ledge and land upright without losing momentum. The digitigrade structure absorbed impact like a spring mechanism. Cade took a glancing strike from thrown debris, but maintained overwatch fire. Hale supported him while returning controlled bursts. I served rearguard, firing at motion vectors rather than confirmed targets. One of them closed within 20 meters. For a split second, our eyes locked. Its expression wasn't rage. It was calculation. The extraction helicopter approached low, rotor wash tearing dust across the basin. Door gunners opened suppressive fire along ridgelines. 2 of the creatures fell under sustained impact, though others dragged the bodies away with startling coordination. They did not abandon their dead. That detail remains burned into my memory. We lifted off under fire. As altitude increased, I saw at least 3 silhouettes standing along a high ridge, watching us depart, not fleeing, not panicking, observing. The canyon swallowed them as sunlight crested over stone. The official report listed the operation as a classified counter-narcotics engagement resulting in hostile elimination and structural collapse. We signed documents reinforcing that narrative. The debrief focused less on what we saw and more on what we would say if questioned. Cade died a year later in what was ruled a traffic accident. Hale requested reassignment and left the teams within 6 months. Pierce retired early. I still wake up some nights hearing that rhythmic clicking echo across stone. It wasn't random. It was organized, coordinated, intelligent. We were not apex predators in that canyon. We were an intrusion, and whatever controls those mountains allowed us to leave, not because we won, but because it chose not to pursue beyond its boundary. If you ever find yourself in a wilderness sector where the silence feels rehearsed, turn back. If you notice footprints that resemble your own but larger, heavier, and set deeper into earth than physics should allow, do not investigate, because some packs don't hunt for hunger. They hunt to remind you where you stand. Subscribe to The World Behind Midnight to uncover the next operation before it disappears. Some secrets are best left behind midnight.